No one in this novel is simply good, and no one in this novel is totally bad. Hannah takes the idea of the anti-hero and she complicates it by giving him a daughter he is fiercely protective of and loves. She takes the idea of violence in American society, extreme violence, even potentially what one considers sin, and asks, is there redemption for this kind of behavior? This is a mythic book dressed in the thriller genre. And it's also really one of those, don't talk to me, I'm reading, get out of my face, kind of books that you just don't want to put down. So it is with great, great pleasure that I introduce Hannah Tinti.
Hey, thank you all for coming. So a couple things. One is that I always give out prizes whenever I do a reading. So before I begin, there's going to be a bunch of prizes. When I do open it up to Q&As, I'm going to ask Suzanne to come up and be the judge, but I'll count 1, 2, 3, and then first person who raises their hand is going to get a signed copy of my book. Yeah. And then other folks are going to get issues of One Story, which is the literary magazine that I run and was a co-founder of. And each of these is a different, it's kind of like a short story of the month club. So yeah, so you will get prizes, and now you have like 15 minutes to think of a question, and then we'll kind of move on from there. So let me begin. Let's see here. Did I mark my spot? Yes, I did. Everybody hear me okay? Great. Okay, so it's always like sort of a different thing when you're sort of standing here before and then when you're standing here this way. Okay, so here's what I want to say. I want to start by just saying it's hard to be brave. Because to be brave, we have to do things that we're afraid of. And I'm sort of an expert on things that frighten other people and myself because I grew up in Salem, Massachusetts, where it is Halloween 365 days a year. One of my very first jobs was working in a place called the Salem Witch Dungeon. Has anyone ever been? I know Suzanne has been. Anybody else? Oh yeah. So it's sort of they do a recreation of a witch trial, and then you go down to the basement and you look at really sort of bad dioramas and basically torture devices that they used on witches. My job was to dress up in rags and a rubber mask and jump out and scare people. It was definitely the best job I've ever had, probably ever will have. It taught me a lot about people, and it was also super fun. But it also sort of, showed me about how, when I was a kid, I was always really sort of, I was an introvert and I was really nerdy and was really shy, but I could go down to this creepy basement and put on a mask, and then suddenly I was super powerful. And I think that's one way of sort of dealing with things that we're afraid of. We can put on this sort of fake mask and pretend we're someone else for a little while, and then that can kind of open us up to try new things. So one of those things I did try was, starting One Story. The other thing that I did try, even though I was afraid, was to be a writer. And this book, The 12 Lives of Samuel Hawley, actually began with a failure. And I think that's an also important thing to think about when you're creative and when you're trying to start something, that you learn a lot from failing. So I was actually working on another book that wasn't going so well. I was a couple hundred pages in and it just felt really dead. And there was also a lot of other things in my life that weren't going so well. I was broke, and I just had my heart broken. I'd gone through a bad breakup, and both my parents got diagnosed with cancer within a week of each other. So I was spending a lot of time in hospitals and helping them through their operations and their therapy. And I was just really down in a really dark place. So I decided I was going to just, run away for a little while, and I was going to go to this place where I'd been before called Whidbey Island. Has anyone ever been to Whidbey? It's
It sounds familiar. Is there like big areas around there? Is it by like Jersey and
Nope. It's on the other side of the country.
Oh.
It's in the San Juan Islands. So that if you flew all the way to Seattle and then you got on a boat and then you went out into the water, that's how you get to Whidbey Island. So I'd rented a cabin there. I put everything on credit cards because I was broke, and I flew across the country. I picked up a rental car. I drove 1 block, and a woman ran a red light and smashed, T-boned my car. And the cops had to come and literally use the jaws of life to pull me out of the car. And it was just one of those moments where it's like, okay, what else? What else, God? Come on. Everything is really, really, really bad right now. And just when you think, nothing but worse can happen to you, something else will happen to you. When, they got me out of the car, and I'm sitting on the side of the road and brushing sort of the broken glass from my hair. And I was like, okay, I'm alive. I'm okay. And I didn't get, I got some injuries, but nothing too bad. If someone had been in the passenger seat, they would have been gone. But luckily, I was traveling alone. So, they towed the car away. I filled out all the paperwork. I took my little rolly bag, and I limped back the block to the rental car place. And they're like, didn't you just leave? And I'm like, guess what, guys? But they gave me a new car. I was able to sign it out and, go. But I should first say, I also realized as I was sitting on the side of the road that I didn't take the insurance because I was trying to save money. So then I was like, oh, man, now I owe for this car too. Anyway, but I went back, and even so, they gave me another car. So there's a chance of getting a second chance, right? But sometimes when you're pushed to that really dark place, I drove in that second car. I went through the intersection. Nobody hit me this time. It was great. Already that was a positive step. Got on the boat, made it to the cabin, stopped at a liquor store, got myself some whiskey. But when I got there, I realized life is too short to waste your time on anything that you don't really care about. And so I threw that book just out the window and started something new, and that was this book. The 12 Lives of Samuel Hawley. I was like, I'm just going to write about things that I care about. I'm going to write about people I care about. I'm going to write about things that move me. And that's started this book. So I'd recently been to, I think there is something, we were talking about this when I was meeting with students before, about how the biggest problem a lot of times as writers is self-doubt and worrying about what other people are going to say about the things that we create or do. So that stops us from even trying in the first place. And, but if you are totally pushed to the wall, you have nothing to lose, it's actually kind of a freeing place to begin creating, and that's what happened with me. So I'd recently been to see the Greasy Pole Contest. Has anyone ever been to the Greasy Pole Contest in Gloucester, Massachusetts? Okay, all right, so every year in Gloucester, Massachusetts, which you might know from The Perfect Storm. Anybody ever seen The Perfect Storm, that movie, or read the book? No, everyone's, okay, a few people. All right, so it's a very famous fishing village. Have you ever eaten Gorton's fish sticks? Okay, all right, so that's where they come from, Gloucester, Massachusetts, Gorton Fisheries, all that frozen fish. Probably if you ever had a fish fillet at McDonald's, it has probably come from Gloucester, Massachusetts. So, at the beginning of the fishing season, all the fishermen put this big pole, a 45-foot long telephone pole, sort of horizontally out over the town pier. They cover it with grease and lard. They nail a flag to the end. All the fishermen get really drunk. And then one by one, they try to walk that pole and capture the flag. And they break their teeth, and they break their legs, and they dislocate their shoulders. And it's really fun. And the whole town goes every year, and we all bring boat horns, and we're blasting them, and these guys are falling into the water, and it's just wonderful. And then one man eventually makes it to the end and then is sort of carried through the town on everyone's shoulders to the nearest bar. So I grew up going to this contest every year, and I'd recently been before I went and got in this car accident, and I just thought, you know what, I like the Greasy Pole, it's really cool, I'm gonna write about the Greasy Pole just because that's where I am right now. As I was writing about them, I sort of set the scene. We got the beach town, we got the men on the pole. I put on my binoculars and zoomed in on one particular man who was about to step onto the greasy pole and do this contest. And I realized that his skin was covered with scars. And I looked a little bit closer and saw that they were bullet holes that had been healed over. And I realized that made me think a lot about scars, the scars that we carry on our bodies, and how each scar has a story attached to it. Sometimes those stories are actually really lovely, like that's the scar that I got when my dad was teaching me to ride a bike and I fell down in our driveway. And then another scar might be from something a little bit more tragic, a mastectomy scar, or from a fight or something really, bad that happened to you. But those scar stories are usually only stories that we tell to people that we're really intimate with. Someone, a lover or a doctor or a close family friend, someone who sees it and like, what happened to you? And then you tell the story. And I had this vision suddenly, like, what if I try to tell a man's entire life story and only tell the story of the scars on his body? And that opened up the book, and that's what became 12 Lives. So it's 12 scars, 12 different times that this man has been shot over his life, from when he's 15 years old until he's about 50. In between is the story of his daughter, Lou. So it's really kind of about how can this guy, who ends up, of course, being a criminal, how can a bad man maybe be a good father? And also, how do we live when life keeps trying to kill us? Right? So every single chapter of Samuel Hawley's has got I call them bullet chapters, which tells the story of each individual bullet. Each one has got a clock, because we're talking about time. It's got a bullet, because we're talking about death. And it has a woman, because we're talking about love. So I'm going to read a really short little section from one of those bullet chapters. I think this is the third or fourth time that Samuel Hawley gets shot. And the only thing that you really need to know is that there's three characters in this scene. One is a man named Ed King, and he has just brought a bunch of, or he's meeting Samuel Hawley, who's our main character, who is a criminal. They're both criminals. Samuel Hawley is dropping off a whole bunch of money to place on a fixed fight. But while he was waiting for Ed King to show up, there was this hot girl with big hips wearing all black, and he was flirting with her. And they were talking about meteors, and now they've just ordered a whole bunch of pie. The waitress came over to the booth carrying a giant plate with 8 slices of pie. There was blueberry, cherry, pineapple, peach, key lime, pecan, chocolate pudding, and banana cream. Each piece had a dollop of whipped cream on top. "There you go," she said as she put down a fork and another napkin. But Ed King wasn't looking at the pie. He was staring across the diner, and his eye was twitching like crazy. "Hey," he called out, "didn't I just see you at Gus's funeral?" Holly spun around. The girl was about to leave, the door already open, her black hat perched on top of her head like a little animal. Holly felt his guts stir, a thrill mixed with dread as she let go of the handle and the glass door softly closed. She blinked twice before answering. "I'm Gus's daughter." "I knew it," said King. "All this time I was trying to place you, but the hat was missing." The girl walked over to their table. "That's a lot of pie," she said. "Have some with us," said King. The girl stood there for a moment, making up her mind. She glanced at Holly and smiled. "All right." Holly slid over and she sat down next to him in the booth, holding the purse in her lap. She was close, her hips spreading across the seat. King called for more forks, and the waitress brought 2. Then she went outside for a cigarette. Holly was already full from the milkshakes, but the girl picked up a fork and took the point off of a banana cream. "I'm sorry about Gus," said King. "It's all right," said the girl. She glanced at Holly. "How do you two know each other?" "The slug works for me sometimes." "Really?" The girl licked the edge of her fork. "Are you from around here, or did you know my dad from Phoenix?" "Well, I know him from New York," said King. "It's a funny story, but I don't think you'll want to hear it." You can tell me, she said. All right, I will, but I wish I had a drink. I'm usually drinking when I tell this story, and it comes out better that way. He scratched his nose. I met Gus playing a trifecta at Aqueduct. After that, he helped me with a couple of jobs. He was a real little guy, and he was nearly always short on cash because he spent all his time at the track. I liked him because he drank harder than anyone I ever saw, and he was never sorry about it. It's funny, he didn't say anything about having a daughter. And you're pretty. You'd think he would have been proud to have a daughter like you. When he was drunk, it was like he was a different person. And he used to do crazy things for money. If somebody said, I bet you won't punch that guy, he'd go up to a bouncer and punch him. Or if we said, I bet you won't toss your wallet, he'd give his credit cards away to strangers. He'd pitch all his clothes off a balcony or throw his keys down a sewer grate. Everyone would be laughing, and he'd say, Sober Gus is gonna hate this. Then I'd see him the next day, his face all busted up, trying to cancel the cards, or on his hands and knees in front of a sewer grate by the side of the road with a hook at the end of a string, and he'd say, Drunk Gus did this to me. A few months back, when he was sober Gus, he asked me for a loan to help him cover a debt, so I gave it to him. But drunk Gus put the money on a horse instead and lost. When I went to collect, sober Gus cried, and I kept thinking about him, crouched over that sewer grate, all pathetic, fishing for his keys. So I told him I'd give him some more time. And you know what drunk Gus did? He went to my gym that same night and busted the safe and stole my deposit for the week. He drove to Atlantic City and spent every bit of the dough. And then he up and died there, owing me, owing everybody. So that's how I know him. The girl put down her fork. You didn't have to tell her that, said Holly. I did, said King. Now she knows all about her old man. The pie fillings were starting to run together, the colors mixing on the plate. Holly could feel heat coming off the girl beside him. Why'd you go to the funeral? She asked. 'Cause he owed me $5,000. It's not so much, said Holly, but he knew that it wasn't about the money. What bothered King was that the guy had turned on him. It's plenty. The girl wrinkled her nose. I haven't got that kind of money. I don't know if any of this is true. King stabbed a piece of pie with his fork. He put it in his mouth. Believe it. The bullet hole in Holly's back began to ache. The first one he'd gotten in the Adirondacks, and as soon as it did, his mind started taking inventory. His father's M14 rifle and extra ammunition in the duffel by his feet, a loaded Smith & Wesson revolver tucked into his belt. Holly's body was ready, every muscle tight. The girl slid out of the booth. She had taken her gloves out of her purse, and she held them crushed between her fingers. She was shaken, but she still thought she could just leave. Thank you for the pie. Fast as lightning, King threw out one of his boxer's arms and caught her around the wrist. It made Holly jump to see him do it. Let go of me. The girl struggled against him. She was looking for the waitress. Sit down, said King. The girl opened her fingers, and the gloves floated to the table. She stopped fighting, and King relaxed his grip, but he didn't let go. The little black hat had come unpinned. Holly saw her eyes flashing underneath the veil. The girl acted like she was going to sit down again, but instead she bent forward and sank her teeth into King's wrist. The man screamed, and his fingers released. As soon as they did, the girl snatched her gloves and ran for the door. King scrambled out of the booth to go after her, but Holly got up and blocked the way. Just let her go, he said. Hellcat! The girl's teeth had gone right through the skin, and now King was bleeding on his baggy suit. Holly listened to her heels running away, and then the bell rang over the door. You don't need that money, said Holly. This doesn't have anything to do with you. It does. He hadn't meant for the words to come out like that, but they did. And as they did, Holly knew they were true. This knowing was different from before, when his body had sensed the bullets coming for him. It was more like the meteor shower he'd told the girl about, a trail of cold rock suddenly burning to life. He'd unlocked something, a possibility. And the entrance was here, in this thin aisle of space before him, between the booths and the counter and a row of spinning stools. Ed King's eye was twitching, the nostrils of his broken nose wide and open. He leaned back, and then his fist flashed forward, as fast as when he'd grabbed the girl's arm. But Holly had been waiting for it, and he dodged just enough for King to miss and topple over onto the table. The dishes went smashing onto the floor, pie tossed in every direction. The cook stuck his head through the kitchen window. What the hell is going on out there? It distracted Holly just enough so that King's next punch connected, a strong blow to the chest and then another quick to the jaw, and before he knew it, he was on the floor of the diner. King had the satchel, and he was crossing over him, and Holly reached up and took hold of the man's legs and threw him to the ground and scrambled on top of him, and then he started beating him with all of his might. It was what he was meant for. Holly's body recognized every turn like a well-worn path, the adrenaline, the heat of his shoulders working, the shifting of weight, the tumble of skin and hair, the blows to the ribs, the ache of breathing, the familiar sensation of his knuckles crunching, and it felt wonderful, the flood of it like some smooth, dark air flowing from a deep cavern. He grabbed the Smith & Wesson from the back of his pants and stuffed it into King's mouth. The cook stepped out from the kitchen and carrying a shotgun. He still had his hairnet on. "That's enough," he shouted. "Drop it." Holly slowly removed the revolver from between King's teeth. He had been so close to killing that his fingers shook. It wasn't the way he'd meant to go, and now he backed away from the edge, his heart beating and the blood roaring through his hands, even as he lifted them over his head. Thank you. I really build my story from asking myself questions. We talked a little bit about this over dinner, but often I'll start with an image like I did. I explained to you all about the greasy pole, right? Something I knew very well. I was just describing it just like it's a real thing, and I was describing it just like a piece of nonfiction. But then I started asking myself questions, which is, who's this guy on the pole? And then he's got scars on his body. Why? How did they get there? What does he have to prove? He's already a macho guy. He doesn't have to prove his manhood on this greasy pole. So what's the reason? Why is he doing this? So I just looked around, and then I was like, oh, he has a daughter. She's sitting there on the beach watching him. She got into trouble. He's somehow like doing this to save her. And then I just keep asking myself more and more questions. Why are they living in this town? How did they get there? I show them, and then I write about them moving there. It's like you ask yourself questions every time you get stuck, and it's a great way to kind of open up the story. And that's usually how I build. Thank you. Are there any authors that I consider an inspiration? Oh gosh, so many. I would say Ray Bradbury for me is a big influence, mostly because I think that Fahrenheit 451 was the first book I sort of found on my own, just sort of like at the library and read and was like, oh my God, rather than having a book assigned to me or given to me by an adult. And it was the first book that I felt like, wow, books are dangerous, and they can crack open this facade of like what real life is. And I went back and reread it and have taught it a number of times, and it really holds up. I mean, yeah, some of it's really dated because like he wrote it in the 50s, but the language is great. It's actually really poetic and lovely. Something Wick is This Way Comes. I also really love that one. He's also just he was a really positive guy. He's got all these rules about writing, which I love. Like writing is not, it should be fun. Like it doesn't have to be torture. He also said, make a list of 10 things you love. Make a list of 10 things you hate. Make a list of 10 things you're afraid of. And those are the things you should be writing about. What you love, what you hate, what makes you afraid. Yeah. So I didn't even know there was going to be 12 at first. I just thought, okay, he's got a bunch of scars, and I'm just going to try to tell those scar stories. And then after I'd done it, maybe 2 or 3, 4 of them maybe, I started feeling like, oh, you know what, this actually feels very feels almost like mythic. It feels like a big story that I'm telling, and it's actually also very much walking the line of magic realism in some cases. So I felt like I wanted to open it up to mythology and make it feel more mythic and large. And so I just pulled down my Greek myths, started rereading them, and struck upon the 12 labors of Hercules and thought about how his story very much dovetailed with the story I was trying to tell. Because when you think about the story of Hercules, or have you guys at least seen the Disney movie? Yeah, okay, many nods for that one. Okay, so in that story, it's about this really strong, powerful hero who performs these magical, deeds. But the real story is Hercules murdered his own wife and children. And that's why he had to go and do those deeds. So that kind of like, it puts like a real darkness on that story. It's a story of redemption, actually. So I knew that he was already haunted by something that happened to his wife. So it sort of allowed me to feel like, okay, if he feels responsible for her death, and then also the magical number 12, which is the 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 numbers on a clock. It allowed me to kind of have something to shoot for and play around with, and also set this bar, because after you've read like one or two of the chapters and you know this guy's gonna get shot in each of those chapters, you're like, okay, I gotta make this interesting when the reader knows exactly what's going to happen. So the only way to do that, besides trying to make it happen in a completely different way each time, was to make him getting shot the least interesting thing that was actually happening in the story. That everything else was actually more important, and him getting shot is just like really more a metaphor than anything else. I think it's really easy to just sort of like slap a bumper sticker on somebody and be like, they're bad, they're good, or whatever, without trying to actually understand what happened, understand their background, understand that, yeah, they might have done some horrible things, but then they also have done these really good things. And you know what? That is life. Life is really messy and really complicated. And that's actually one of the reasons why I write in the first place, is trying to figure that out. I think that if I could be one character, it's funny, but the answer came to me immediately as soon as you said that. It would be this woman named Miss Waldron, who's in the story that I wrote called Miss Waldron's Red Colobus. And I wrote the story after I read a piece in the New York Times about this particular monkey that had just been declared extinct. And the name of the monkey was Miss Waldron's Red Colobus. And they did not say who Miss Waldron was, where she came from, anything like that. And I was like, okay, who was this woman having monkeys named after her? She must have been kind of interesting. So I did some research, and the only thing that I could find was that she was the traveling companion of the great white hunter who, like, a guy named Willoughby Lowe, who shot the first specimens for the British Natural History Museum in like 1918, 19. And I was like, okay, now she must be really cool, because she's just like traveling companion means like, what was that? Like, so it's not somebody he's married to, it's just some lady who's like hanging out with him, going to Africa, and again, being so cool and having monkeys named after her. So I was just like, I'm gonna write her own history, and I just made up this whole story about her. And I was also trying to write about extinction, and also trying to write about, again, people trying to snuff you out and you overcoming that and not allowing them to snuff you out. Do I base the characters that I write about off of people that I know? Sometimes, although, I think what you have to do as a fiction writer is you've got to change them just enough so they don't recognize themselves. And that's the trick to using your family in your fiction. So that's a good trick, but a lot of times I'm also, really trying new things and but not everybody's that close to. I think the closest I ever came was in The Good Thief. There was this like angry woman who shouted all the time, who sort of ends up taking care of Ren, the main character. And she's one of those people who's like really harsh on the outside, but you find out later she's actually really sweet. But she's rough. And that was pretty much all my aunties. They were like really rough. But then, as I got older and I was like kind of afraid of them, and they'd like brush your hair and then hit you with a hairbrush. And then like, when I got older and got to know them, I was like, actually, they all had really rough lives, and they're really interesting women, and they were actually real super sweet and soft inside. So I just had to slowly learn that. So, yeah. Well, I'm not wearing my combat boots right now, but sometimes when I'm wearing my combat boots, people are like, oh, just like Lou wears combat boots in the story. So she's kind of close, I guess. This is in the new book. This is Holly's daughter. She's probably the closest I've ever written to somebody who's like me. But she's not me. But at the same time, Holly's a lot like me, but he's not me. So what you do is you almost, for every character you write, they're a little bit of you. You have to kind of step into them to create them. It's very strange when you receive a box of books and you open them and you kind of recognize your name, but you don't recognize anything else if it's like in Korean or something. I mean, I speak French and I can read Spanish, but that's about as far as my languages go. But yeah, it's really interesting and cool. But also, I'm like, I have no idea if this was translated. I have no idea if this is, yeah, they could have been doing a whole other thing. I mean, somebody checks that, I guess. Like at the publisher, I guess they make sure it's like pretty close. What's more interesting is there were some translations that the translators reached out to me, and we actually went back and forth to kind of explain some things, and that made me feel really involved and cool. But then sometimes you just get them. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know. They're on my bookshelf. I look at them sometimes. It's a weird feeling. Nah. I don't really worry about it. I will tell you, like as you sort of when you write a book and then it goes out into the world, I do not have children, but I can imagine it's a little bit like, you know, it's sad when you send them off to kindergarten and you're like, oh, I miss my little baby, and then when they're going away to college, you're like, goodbye. like I'm really excited to get my life back. At least my friends who have kids, this is what they say. They're like kind of sad, but they're also super excited. So I feel a little bit like I let the book go. I never reread them. I've not reread, I mean, besides reading sections like I do, I've never gone back and reread any of those books. So it's really like a letting it go, because you have to let it go in order to write something new. Yeah. Yeah, this morning, I'm still thinking about him. I was walking my dog in Brooklyn, and I walked by this guy, this really old guy with, he had a hard hat on, almost like a World War I metal helmet, okay? Mirrored sunglasses, a white goatee, and a cigarette holder like FDR. And he was just like walking. And I was like, oh my God. I walked by him and I was like, I'm still thinking about him. I'm definitely going to use him somehow. And then I was like, what if he took off, of course I was thinking, I was like, he's going to take off those mirrored sunglasses and he's not going to have any eyes. Like that's, can you see I'm from Salem, Massachusetts? This is what happens. He doesn't have eyes. He doesn't have eyes. Anyway, so that's what happens. Yeah, people watching is great. Another thing I have my students often do is go to like Washington Square Park and then safely eavesdrop and write down some things. Like put their headphones in so it seems like they're not listening, but actually be listening to people, writing things down. Yeah, you can find a lot to go off of for real life. We were talking about, I was mentioning to the writers I met with before this about one of my first writing teachers. It was a woman named Blanche Boyd, and the very first class, she had us all write something down on a piece of paper that we had never told anyone else, a secret we'd never told anyone. And then we took those pieces of paper outside and we burned them. And she's like, this is to get you beyond this idea of, you know, that it's about the act and the power of writing it down. And once it's written down, it's up to you to decide what to do with it. And by having that moment, like burning something, writing something and burning it right away, it just removes that fear because, you know, if there's no audience, you're free to write whatever you want. So that's one thing, writing something and burning it. And another thing which I actually brought up here to share with you guys, I was talking a little bit about journaling. And journaling to me has become like this huge thing that I learned from the cartoonist Linda Barry, who I was mentioning. And journaling has become a way for me to do all those things because nobody sees this, except I'm going to show a little bit to you guys. No one sees this except for me. This is only for me. I like sort of write it in a code so nobody really understands it but me. But it's a way of actually creating for me a memory palace of things that have happened, experiences that I want to use and remember later. So when I was writing the 12 Lives of Samuel Hawley, each of the chapters, the bullet chapters, takes place in another part of the country. And all I did was I went back to my journals and I pulled the journals when I was in those places, like when I was in Alaska, when I was in Arizona, and just pulled those. And if you looked at the journals and looked at the book, you can see like it's almost exact things that I'm pulling from that. So, so it's sort of a combination of, I call it like ephemera, which is just like doodles and things. Tickets, these are like my niece and nephews, their class pictures. Little drawings that I do. Here's like a postcard somebody sent me, I cut it up. Here's an alien. Here, I went to a Frida Kahlo exhibit, and I just bought a bunch of postcards and taped them in. What else? Might be, yeah, a ticket to something, and it just sort of becomes these, they become these, almost, I think they're almost like a separate work of art, right? That becomes that private space. I taught my goddaughter how to shoot a bow and arrow. So that's, you got to create a safe space for yourself. For me, this is my burned place. This is the place nobody sees but me, and now you. Yeah. So one thing that I'm afraid of is singing. I like to sing, but I don't like to do it in front of other people. I like to do like in the shower, right? Alone, nobody's listening. Also, like my sisters were both like trained singers, and they're like really, really good. And so I never did any music or anything, and I don't know how to read music, and I don't know how to do any of that stuff. So it's always like their arena. You know how that happens in families? Like, and it's not my arena. So, but because this book is about love, really, and that's the thing that keeps you living when everything is trying to kill you, it's love. So this is really a love story. So I've been singing a love song at every single event that I've done. So now I am going to sing one in front of you, and I'm really scared. So I could use a little bit of help while I'm doing that, and I'm going to ask you guys to maybe snap with me so that I don't feel so scared. I might shut my eyes because I'm so freaked. All right, ready? But you have to do things you're afraid of, right? It's just like burning it. But unfortunately, this is going to be filmed, which is, I'm terrified this is going to be actually filmed. Okay, here we go. Love song. Wait, I got to slow it down. Let's do it a little slower. Ready? That's it. My love is a mountainside. So firm it can calm the tide. My love is just like a mountainside. Stand so firm it can calm the tide. That's why my love is a mountainside. My love is an ocean's roar. So strong that I can't let you go. Love is just like an ocean's roar. Grow so strong that I can't let you go. That's why my love is an ocean's roar. Love is longer than forever, and endless is the march of time, till 99 years after never, in my heart you'll still be mine, because my love is a deep blue sea. So deep that I'll never be free. My love is just like the deep blue sea. It's grown so strong that I'll never be free. That's why my love is a deep blue sea. All right. Woo!